The battleship Gneisenau, once a symbol of naval pride and one of Nazi Germany's most powerful weapons, would eventually be reduced to a heap of twisted steel. Imagine the scene: a pitch-black night, air raid sirens howling, searchlights cutting through the sky, and the thunder of aircraft engines overhead. Britain was preparing a massive bombing raid on Kiel, with one clear objective: to wipe the battleship Gneisenau off the face of the earth. This ship held the status of Hitler's second flagship and was nearly a twin to the Scharnhorst. Not so long before, confident voices on its decks declared that the Third Reich would soon reign supreme over the Atlantic. But on that fateful night, fate turned its back. The giant that was meant to terrorize the Allies stood still, exposed, vulnerable, and unable to fight back. That moment marked the beginning of its tragic downfall, a story filled with bold defiance and earth-shaking explosions that rattled the city to its core. Yet before that night, the ship had lived a very different life. Gneisenau was never meant to be just another vessel. In the mid-1930s, Germany was obsessed with restoring its naval power, and its battleships were intended to be visible proof of the Reich's return to maritime greatness. International naval treaties limited the size and armament of new ships, but German engineers found a clever way around these restrictions. They traded gun caliber for speed, maneuverability, and strong armor protection. Gneisenau was equipped with 11-inch guns, smaller than the British 15-inch guns, but the ship was faster and better defended than many of its rivals. When Gneisenau slid into the water for the first time, thousands watched its massive hull glide from the slipway into the sea. It wasn't just the launch of a warship. It was a declaration that Germany had returned to the world of naval power. Soon, that symbol became a hunter, stalking Allied merchant ships across the ocean. From its earliest voyages, the crew understood that this ship wasn't built for static defense. It was built for bold, fast raids. In the Atlantic and the North Sea, it quickly became a nightmare for Allied convoys. British sailors knew, if the name Gneisenau came across the radio, danger was near and death might follow. These successful raids made the ship famous, and Britain became determined to eliminate it at any cost. On its first major operation, sailing alongside its twin Scharnhorst, the crew believed they were part of something monumental. The Atlantic seemed endless, and behind every horizon could be another unsuspecting convoy. Their mission was not to duel British battleships head-on, but to cut off Britain's lifeline, merchant shipping. Here, the Germans excelled. Speed, endurance, and excellent reconnaissance turned them into predators of the night. In December 1939 came Gneisenau's moment of glory. Off the cold, rocky shores of Norway, where the Allies were preparing to protect their shipping routes, the German ship struck first. Together, Gneisenau and Scharnhorst delivered a deadly blow to the British auxiliary cruiser Rawalpindi. Though hopelessly outgunned, the British captain chose to fight, a heroic but doomed stand. German salvos tore the ship apart, and within minutes, the burning vessel slipped beneath the waves. This was more than a battle. It was a message to the British Empire. In London, the alarm bells rang. The German battleships could appear anywhere, at any time. From then on, every convoy felt a constant fear, knowing the two steel predators were out there. In Berlin, the victories were celebrated. Newspapers boasted of naval triumphs, and Hitler believed his fleet could make Britain tremble. Over the following months, Gneisenau continued to haunt the Atlantic. It didn't just sink ships, it disrupted the entire Allied supply system. Convoys were forced to change routes, use more fuel, and deploy more escorts. Britain realized that if the Germans roamed freely at sea, the war could be lost. When Gneisenau and Scharnhorst sailed together, the Atlantic seemed to hold its breath. Their commanders understood that British battleships had larger guns, but the Germans refused direct confrontation. Instead, they turned the ocean into a hunting ground, where speed and surprise were their weapons. One of the most dramatic episodes came near Norway. The British aircraft carrier Glorious, returning from a mission, suddenly found itself in the patrol path of the two German giants. The attack was swift, Massive gunfire shook the sea, and within 20 minutes the carrier was a blazing wreck. Two escorting destroyers were sunk as well. For Britain, it was a shock. Losing a carrier in open waters proved the German raiders could destroy not only merchant ships, but major warships too. Each victory raised morale aboard Gneisenau. The crew felt they were not just fighting, they were shaping history. And Hitler was thrilled. But in Britain, anger grew. Detailed plans for destroying Gneisenau and Scharnhorst were drawn up. Radio operators listened day and night. Aircraft scouted, fleets redeployed. Every mention of the two battleships in reports caused deep concern. But with every success, Gneisenau became a bigger target. The British were preparing a decisive response. And soon, they would strike with everything they had. The Royal Navy was not about to tolerate such bold defiance. With every new victory, Gneisenau and Scharnhorst became targets of the highest priority. What once had been ghost-like raids across the Atlantic now turned into a deadly game of pursuit. British intelligence and air reconnaissance began tracking every movement, making each voyage increasingly dangerous. The first serious blow came from the air. In April 1940, during the Norwegian campaign, Gneisenau was struck by British bombers. Despite strong anti-air defenses and constant evasive maneuvers, several bombs exploded close enough to damage the hull and key control systems. The damage wasn't fatal, but the message was clear: the enemy would hunt them everywhere, on the open sea and even in their own naval bases. From that moment, every departure from harbor was a gamble. Every return was a test of survival. And in June 1940, the first major naval clash took place. Operating in the North Sea alongside Scharnhorst, Gneisenau encountered British forces near the horizon. The battle was fierce. This time, the German giants faced a capable opponent. During the exchange of gunfire, Gneisenau took a direct torpedo hit from the British destroyer Ardent. The impact shook the ship, causing her to list sharply as water flooded several compartments. Only through the flawless coordination of her crew did the battleship remain afloat and withdraw safely. For the British, this was proof the German steel leviathans were not invincible. Day by day, the noose tightened. Radio intercepts warned of increased patrols. British reconnaissance aircraft circled the ocean almost constantly. Even in port, the German sailors no longer felt secure. Berlin understood that if Britain could corner these ships, the naval war might shift dramatically. Yet rather than break morale, the struggle only strengthened it. On deck, the crew was certain Gneisenau would return to sea, and the Allies would feel her power again. While the ship underwent repairs, her systems were reinforced and the crew trained relentlessly. They knew the British were waiting for their chance to strike, but there was no doubt Gneisenau would hunt again. And as the rivalry escalated, the final confrontation drew closer. Winter 1941 became the stage for one of the most daring naval operations of the entire war, Operation Berlin. The plan was deceptively simple: slip past the Royal Navy and wreak havoc on the Atlantic supply convoys that kept Britain alive. It was simple in theory and incredibly dangerous in practice. Gneisenau and Scharnhorst operated like two fangs of a single predator. Using their speed and precise coordination, they slipped through British patrol lines and broke out into the open Atlantic. In the first week alone, their tactics proved devastating. They struck convoys quickly and decisively, appearing on the horizon, unleashing thunderous salvos, and sending heavily laden merchant ships to the bottom. One of the most dramatic moments came when they attacked a convoy coming from America. The British escorts tried to defend it, but the firepower of the two battleships was overwhelming. Within hours, several transports were sunk, and the rest scattered in panic. Communications broke down. British admirals received reports of chaos spreading across the Atlantic. Operation Berlin showed the Allies something they feared most. The German raiders could operate far from home and feel completely in control of the ocean. London was furious. Orders were issued to find and destroy Gneisenau at any cost. Meanwhile, aboard the battleship, morale soared. Some believed another raid like this could shift the entire naval war. But the greater the success, the greater the danger. The Royal Navy began assembling special hunter groups, battleships, cruisers, even aircraft carriers, all focused on eliminating the two German raiders. The triumph of Operation Berlin ended in a strategic trap. Gneisenau returned to the French port of Brest, where she immediately came under constant Allied air attack. Every day in harbor put her at risk, and the next phase would be even more dangerous. February 1942 marked one of the boldest naval operations of the war, Operation Cerberus. 3 German warships, Gneisenau, Scharnhorst, and the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, lay in Brest, directly under the watchful eye of the British. RAF bombers attacked them almost daily, staying meant certain destruction. Escaping into the Atlantic was impossible. British naval control was overwhelming. So the Germans chose an unthinkable option. They would sprint straight through the English Channel, past the very shores of Britain. The operation began on the night of February 11th. The Germans prepared meticulously. Hundreds of Luftwaffe fighters provided cover. Radio interference jammed British radar. The ships moved at top speed. And there, in the dark waters of the Channel, with the lights of Britain visible on the horizon, 3 giants moved like shadows: Gneisenau, Scharnhorst, and Prinz Eugen. For Britain, it was a humiliation. Despite patrols, observation posts, and radar stations, the alarm was raised too late. By the time British aircraft took off, the German ships were already under Luftwaffe protection. Attacks were attempted, but bombers were shot down, and torpedo planes failed to strike. Even the fast coastal attack boats could not intercept them in time. The crew of Gneisenau spent the entire passage in constant tension, expecting a devastating blow at any moment. But the planning worked. The ships made the crossing with only minor damage from mines, and all 3 reached German ports safely. In Berlin, Operation Cerberus was hailed as a triumph. Goebbels compared it to legendary naval feats of old. German newspapers celebrated the embarrassment of Britain, which had allowed enemy battleships to sail past its very doorstep. For the Allies, it was a heavy blow to national pride. But the German celebration was premature. Although Gneisenau had broken out of Brest, it was now even more vulnerable. Britain was preparing new, massive air raids, and soon the battleship would face the full power of the Royal Air Force. When Gneisenau returned to German waters after its daring dash through the English Channel, the crew breathed a sigh of relief. They felt like heroes. All of Europe was talking about Operation Cerberus. But the ship's fateful trials were only beginning. Britain had no intention of accepting defeat. They were determined to destroy this battleship at any cost. Every time the ship left port, it was a tremendous risk, and every return became a new test of endurance. Soon, in June 1940, Gneisenau took part in its first major naval battle. Operating in the North Sea alongside Scharnhorst, it encountered British forces appearing on the horizon. The fight was fierce. This time, the German giants faced an enemy of equal strength. During the exchange of gunfire, Gneisenau was struck by a torpedo launched by the British destroyer HMS Ardent. The impact was devastating. The ship listed, several compartments flooded instantly. Only the flawless teamwork of the crew kept the battleship afloat and allowed it to withdraw. For the British, this was proof the German steel behemoths were not invincible. Day by day, the crew felt the noose tightening around them. Radio intercepts confirmed that enemy patrols were increasing, and British reconnaissance aircraft circled over the ocean almost daily. Even in their own harbors, German sailors no longer felt safe. Berlin understood clearly. If Britain managed to corner the battleships, the entire course of the naval war could change for the worse. Yet these challenges only hardened the crew's resolve. On deck, there was a firm belief. The ship would still show its true strength. While Gneisenau underwent repairs, its systems were reinforced and the crew trained for new raids. Every sailor knew the British were waiting for the right moment to strike. But no one doubted that the ship would sail again, and once more become a nightmare for enemy convoys. Still, The longer this dangerous standoff continued, the closer a decisive clash approached. Britain was deploying more and more forces to hunt down the German battleships, while Gneisenau prepared for what was expected to be its greatest triumph. The winter of 1941 became the moment when Gneisenau and its sister ship Scharnhorst embarked on one of the boldest naval operations of the entire war. The mission was codenamed Operation Berlin. The idea was simple in theory, but incredibly risky in practice. Break into the Atlantic, evade Royal Navy patrols, and inflict maximum damage on the convoy supplying Britain. German command understood that every ton of sunk cargo weakened the enemy. Success could shake London's confidence in its control of the seas. Gneisenau and Scharnhorst operated with remarkable coordination, like two fangs of a single predator. Using their speed and tight maneuvering, they slipped past British barriers and entered the open Atlantic. In just the first week, the results were dramatic. Hunting convoys, they struck fast and suddenly. A silhouette on the horizon, a few deafening salvos, and heavy transports laden with food, weapons, and machines disappeared beneath the waves. One of the most notable engagements occurred when they attacked a convoy coming from America. British escort ships attempted to form a defense line, but the firepower of the two battleships overwhelmed them. Within hours, several transports were sunk, and the rest scattered like frightened prey. Panic spread, communications broke down, and British admirals received reports of chaos across the Atlantic. Operation Berlin made a deep impression on Allied command. It became clear that the German ships could operate far from their bases and still feel like masters of the ocean. In London, anger surged. Admirals demanded that Gneisenau be found and destroyed at any cost. Meanwhile, the crew felt on top of the world. On deck and below, men talked about how just one more raid like this could change the course of the naval war. But victory brought new danger. Each success meant Britain would send even stronger forces against them. Special hunter groups were being formed, including battleships, cruisers, and aircraft carriers. London knew if Gneisenau and Scharnhorst continued their campaign, the convoys might cease to exist. And although Operation Berlin was a triumph, its end was overshadowed. The German ships returned to Brest, a port that quickly became a trap. British aircraft and warships began a blockade, and every day in harbor meant new air raids. Gneisenau was now entering the most dangerous stage of its service. February 1942 became one of the most daring chapters of the naval war, Operation Cerberus. The battleships Gneisenau and Scharnhorst, along with the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, were sitting in Brest under the constant threat of British airstrikes. The RAF bombed them almost daily, and any raid could be fatal. Berlin realized that keeping such valuable ships in port meant slow destruction. But escaping into the Atlantic was impossible. The British controlled it completely. So German command chose the unthinkable, a direct dash through the English Channel, right past the British coast, the very place where the enemy was strongest. The operation began on the night of February 11th. The Germans prepared thoroughly. Hundreds of Luftwaffe fighters provided air cover. Radio interference jammed British radar, and the ships moved at maximum speed. In the dark waters of the Channel, with the lights of Britain visible on the horizon, the three giants glided like shadows. For Britain, it was a humiliation. Despite patrols and observation posts, the alarm was raised too late. When RAF aircraft finally arrived, the German ships were already under their own fighter protection. The attacks failed, bombers were shot down, torpedo planes could not get close, and even the famous motor torpedo boats could not block their path. The crew of Gneisenau spent the entire transit in tense silence, waiting at any moment for coastal batteries or carrier aircraft to strike. But the meticulous planning paid off. The German ships completed the voyage with only minor damage from mines near the end, and all three reached safe harbors. In Berlin, Cerberus was celebrated as a great victory. Goebbels compared it to legendary naval feats. The German press proclaimed the humiliation of Britain, which had allowed the enemy to pass right under its nose. But again, the celebration was short-lived. Although Gneisenau had escaped Brest, it was now even more vulnerable. Britain prepared new, heavier strikes. And soon, the battleship would face the full fury of the Royal Air Force. Its massive hull would later lie abandoned at the pier, rusting in the cold water, a silent reminder of how grand ambitions met the harsh reality of war. Only a few former crewmen could proudly say they had served on a ship that once was a true legend of its time. The final days of Gneisenau resembled the fate of a warrior who, still full of strength, falls not in open battle, but by the decision of his own commanders. Her scuttling in Gotenhafen in early 1945 became a tragic symbol of the end of Germany's naval ambitions. Yet even resting on the seabed, the ship continued to live on in memory. After the war, many legends surrounded the battleship. Some claimed that her hull could still be raised and restored. Others insisted she had become part of the underwater structures of the port. In reality, the giant had turned into a silent steel tomb hidden beneath the waves. But her name and her heroic, though short, story remained in textbooks, chronicles, and the memories of those who served. Gneisenau began her life as a symbol of incredible power. She took part in daring raids, broke through the English Channel, sank carriers and transports. Yet in the end, she became a helpless veteran destined to be forgotten. Her fate is a dramatic reminder that even the mightiest machines of war are powerless before time, overwhelming force, and changing circumstances. Stories like these make naval history feel truly alive, because behind every steel giant stood people, men who believed in their duty, fought to the end, died, and were proud of their ship. Gneisenau did not fade into obscurity. She remains forever in history as the Reich's second flagship battleship, one that lived a brilliant, swift, and tragic life.